tulip season is almost over, so it's good I finally finished this painting of a tulips. Is it perfect? I don't think so, but that's not the point. That's not why we sketch and paint. It's to just learn and experiment. So if you want to experiment and see how I painted this picture, follow along. So I actually did this painting over the course of 4 visits, which wasn't a bad thing because sitting in this garden area was really kind of nice. I'm not sure why I did outlines of these flowers, but I got a good green down and it's going to let me blend it out because this board is pretty non-absorbent and it blends out pretty good. I started out by blending it and trying to leave some wide areas for the colors of the flowers, but as you can see I just eventually blended it all out. This sanded board will let me put colors on top of the green, which is kind of cool. And where the board was kind of wet here, you can see that the watercolor pencil just started to spread immediately, which is also fun to learn. It'll be cool for an abstract work. This pastel board by Ampersand Arts is proving to be a good experiment. But I'm a little frustrated by this drawing, so I'm going to regroup and try a different approach. So this is the second time I've been here. The first time I didn't have the right stuff for this camera. I didn't bring enough stuff to draw these flowers. This second time I was a bit more prepared and I realized instead of drawing the outlines I needed to focus on the bigger shapes. So I blocked them in with the side of the pencil knowing that the pastel board was rough enough to take the finer details at a later stage. Normally you would run out of tooth on a regular paper and the pencil pigment wouldn't lay down as well. But on this sanded paper it's going to take layer upon layer. I think the layers will add for some interesting textures once I'm done. I'm not using much water on the brush for this, so I can keep the colors from blooming like they did earlier. Instead, I'm letting more of the lines from the pencil marks stay. At this point, I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but it's fun to experiment with the different approaches. The experience itself is quite nice, and I'm glad I found a spot without a lot of foot traffic. This particular brand of watercolor pencil puts down a rich pigment, and even more so on this pastel board. This red went on really thick, and it's almost like a gouache paint, which is more of an opaque watercolor paint. I'm not sure what I'm doing with this background, other than trying to create some depth with some out of focus color. Even though this is the ugly phase of the painting, I'm really enjoying the beauty of the flowers and the sights and sounds of the birds. Just look at this really cool bird called a western tanager. It's one of my favorite parts of being outside, the wildlife. I get to see a lot of it. This particular bird only comes through in the spring, so like the tulips, he won't be around for long. And this represents my 3rd visit to this spot. I set up again, and this time around I realized the background needed some better definition. Adding in an S-curve is a pretty easy way to indicate some perspective.
That's better.
And I still wanted those smaller flowers in the distance. It's also a good way to indicate depth. So now that the composition is starting to sit well with me, and I like how it's starting to match the scene that I'm seeing, I get to start working on the details of the flowers. It's fun to kind of experiment with different shading techniques and different ways to try to get the look of these beautiful tulips, and I'm working on these purple ones first by adding some different colors to get the different lighting effects. And you can see that I'm using a lighter color here, and it goes on, and even I can go light over dark with this pastel paper, which is kind of cool. I know that a little later I'll even use some non-water soluble pencils to get even a different look for these flowers, but here on site I'm going to try to capture the actual look that it's harder for me to do with just photos. I like how this light goes over the dark. That's really cool. Which leads me to the final touches of this painting. I used Prismacolors to do lighter colors on top of these flowers, and the finer points of the Prisma really added a good touch, I think. I really like this pastel board, and it was fun to experiment with it and figure out how I can best do a nice painting of tulips. If you've done something like this, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, check out this video of another experiment I did using a non-traditional approach to using colored pencils. You can do a lot of different things and explore a lot of different places. Thanks for exploring with me.